Bowling in the UK is dead. Bowling has been suffering in most countries for some while now, and since the pandemic, things have just become much worse. Bowling was in decline for a number of years prior to 2020, and in the UK, bowling wasn't in a particularly good place. BTBA memberships were decreasing year on year, and for those of you from other parts of the world who may be unfamiliar with the BTBA, they are essentially the official bowling governing body for England. But exactly what has gone wrong? Well, leagues throughout the country were folding either due to a lack of bowlers or the centres who decided that simply they weren't interested in hosting leagues. Likewise, tournaments were decreasing at rapid rates, and it was getting harder and harder to generate the entry numbers needed, and many centres simply were not willing to let tournaments use the majority of their lanes, mainly because they were only interested in open bowlers. And on top of this, the centres were struggling to survive, and many ended up shutting their doors for good. Now, I know that the majority of the people who watch my videos are from the US, so I hope that this is still of interest to you. I always think that it's quite interesting to compare bowling in different countries. So today the main focus is going to be how far bowling has fallen in the UK, and it's pretty clear to me that it's practically dead now. So what is the current state of bowling here, and how did we get to this point? Well, a huge problem is just the lack of bowlers that we have. Let's look at the numbers to see just how much things have declined. Right now there are roughly around 2,000 BTBA members, but not all of these are active members. So as an estimate, there are probably around 1,500 active members. But let's compare this to how things used to be. At the height of bowling's popularity in the UK, there were as many as 28,000 members. This would have been around the 1960s. These numbers did decrease, as we entered the 70s and the 80s, and around the 80s and 90s, you'd probably be looking at around 15,000 members. But just look at how much that has come down now in 20 years. Now we're at an estimated number of 1,500 active members. And out of those 1,500, around 400 are junior bowlers. Each year you have the junior nationals, and you normally get around 250 of these 400 bowlers that take part. Just to compare once again how good things were just a few short years ago, back in the late 90s, there were around 3,000 junior bowlers, and normally around 2,000 of these would compete in the nationals each year. It's shocking really just how far membership numbers have fallen. Now, what I'm going to say next is not a criticism of the BTBA, but this is just simply an observation based on the things that I've heard other bowlers speak about. It just seems that your average league bowler no longer really wants to be a part of the BTBA. Now, of course, everybody will have their own reasons for this, but I think from what I heard, many seem to feel that they weren't really seeing many benefits for the money that they were contributing for their memberships. Now, of course, there are many benefits for being a member of any National Bowling Association, but this just wasn't the general viewpoint, right, of league bowlers. They themselves personally didn't seem to be feeling like they were getting enough benefits to justify the yearly cost. And it's the same for the USBC, to be honest. I think that they've seen a decline in numbers over the years, and I'm sure many bowlers in the US have had a similar feeling about their National Bowling Association and the National Bowling Association, I'm sure, for many other countries, that these league bowlers are sort of feeling that it's not for them for a number of different reasons. But aside from the decline in membership numbers, there are a whole host of reasons why bowling leagues and tournaments have suffered greatly. So let's try and look at some of the main reasons for such a dramatic decrease in memberships. Let's start with the problem of league bowling. When I started bowling, I can remember there being a huge amount of leagues in my local centre. I'd estimate that there were around 15 separate leagues per week, and as many as 3 leagues on a single evening. Fast forward 10 years to 2023, and now there's basically only 2 leagues each week in the evening, and then 2 or 3 senior leagues that take place during the day. This is a staggering drop. I mean, just think about how many bowlers you need to be able to run 15 leagues a week. But these bowlers have just vanished, and it just gives you a very strong indication of how many people have packed up their bowling balls for good. And there are a number of different reasons why many bowlers have left the game, and why the number of leagues have shrunk drastically. Firstly, most centres in the UK, they're just not equipped to be able to run a large number of quality leagues. And to be honest, most centres, they're just not interested in trying to do this either. They only really care about open bowlers at the end of the day, because in their minds, this is where the big money is. And because of this, the leagues were always very low on the priority list for many centres. Obviously, this frustrated many regular league bowlers, as in their mind, they were bowling several leagues a week and paying a lot of money to do so, and I think they felt that they were just being mistreated in a way. They felt like the centres didn't care about the leagues. Bowlers were then coming down and playing on lanes that kept breaking down, or on lane conditions that were being put down by lane machines that, to be honest, should have been thrown away many years ago. And these problems were apparent in centres all across the UK. So what really caused it was when lockdown came about, and this just about sealed the deal for many. Their balls remained in the back of their cupboards, and they had very little incentive to start bowling once again. So while there are still centres out there that do care, and there are some good leagues and even some good tournaments around too, if you know where to find them, league bowling in the UK is really on its knees. There just doesn't seem to be enough bowlers anymore. Rising costs haven't helped either, with lineage fees increasing year on year. And I haven't even really got onto the fact that many centres started to close during the last few years, and I'm sure there are many more that are on the verge of closing their doors. Now let's move on to the next main problem, which is that there's no real tournament scene. The tournament scene in the UK has been on the downslide for a long while. There just isn't the money in the game here, and it just seems almost impossible, to generate the entry numbers that you need. This has been an issue for some time now, and many of the UK's staple tournaments are no more. There used to be some incredible tournaments that were extremely popular with bowlers, such as the London International, which was held originally at the old Wembley Bowl, for anyone who remembers that, before moving around to bowling alleys such as Heathrow, Tolworth, and then finally it moved back to Airport Bowl in Heathrow for a number of years. Sadly, this tournament is currently no more. Perhaps it will come back in the future, who knows, but there just seems to be a lack of what I would call a major tournament in the UK. Now, you know the sort of thing that I mean, the kind of tournament that everybody looks forward to year in, year out. But a little bit more on this later on in the video. Firstly, let's just take a look at the main tours that exist in the UK right now. And just before we do that, I would just like to thank everybody who's watched this video so far. And if you have enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could just go ahead and click the subscribe button below. So firstly, there is the BTBA Championship Tour. Essentially, this tour is aimed at bowlers who want to start playing more tournaments. In the words of the BTBA, their mission with this championship tour is to provide competitive tournaments to bowlers who are looking to bridge the gap from league to tournament play. We want to attract as many bowlers as possible to come out and experience tournament play and to feel competitive and not intimidated. The aim is for bowlers to gain confidence to take their bowling to the next level. Others will seek to improve their game further with coaching. The only kind of issue that we have with this tour is that it's only really started to take place once again in the 2023 season, so really this will be the big test now. Now the pandemic is over, we can start to see what sort of entry numbers this tour can generate. But I guess the problem is that this tour is a good thing, but it's focused on a very specific type of bowler, i.e. the bowlers who want to make the transition from league to tournament play. And it's still only quite a minor component of the overall tournament structure in the UK. Essentially, it's a stepping stone to get people involved in tournaments, and then it needs to be used to be able to direct people into a main tour. This leads us quite nicely to the one small bright spark in UK bowling, and that is the recent creation of the English Sport Bowling Tour. The premise of the English Sport Bowling Tour is to give bowlers the chance to compete on extremely difficult lane conditions, and it brings together the top bowlers in the UK. So this is now on the other end of the spectrum, where the Championship Tour focus more perhaps on bowlers of a level where they're starting to think about playing more tournaments. The Sport Bowling Tour is focused more on bowlers in the UK at the very top level. Those kind of players who are at the level where they can be representing their country. And to be honest, the players that are competing on this tour right now, they would be what you would consider the best bowlers that the UK has to offer. And this does create a slight problem because once again, it only appeals to a very small section of bowlers, right? So you have the Championship Tour, which is perhaps the lower end, so to speak. And then you've got the Sport Bowling Tour, which is the top end. And then there's not really anything in the middle. So if you're maybe a 170, 180 average bowler, well, you're not particularly going to want to go and bowl against the very best bowlers on the Sport Bowling Tour. But unfortunately, there really isn't that much else out there to bowl. And if you want a decent tournament to compete in, well, unfortunately, you're going to have to go abroad. That's just the only option. There just isn't enough in the UK right now. And in 2023, the Sport Bowling Tour has seen a huge increase in popularity. The second stop in the 2023 season filled up its maximum capacity with 90 bowlers competing. And the third stop, which is due to take place on the 15th and 16th of April, basically filled up instantly with almost 120 bowlers due to take part. So clearly there is still some demand, for tournament bowling, although there are a couple of reasons why this tour has suddenly become so popular. Firstly, there's no denying that it is a very good set of tournaments that they run, and I think many bowlers enjoy the challenge on playing extremely difficult conditions. However, we have to keep in mind that the Sport Bowling Tour is really on its own and it doesn't particularly have any competition. So although they've done extremely well to grow this tour to where it is now, I think the increase in popularity is somewhat due to the fact that there aren't that many other regular tours or tournaments in the UK for bowlers to take part in. Also, what has helped is the fact that it's now part of the selection process for the junior and adult England team. If you want to compete for the chance to be selected for Team England, well, you'll need to participate in at least some of the 7 tournaments that the Sport Bowling Tour runs each season. It's a good move, however, by Team England, and clearly it's been a good decision to focus the selection process around this tour, as it's resulted in a surge in entry numbers. But leaving the Sport Bowling Tour aside for now, just like with leagues, it's getting incredibly difficult to convince centres to give up their lanes for tournaments. And outside of the Sport Bowling Tour, the tournament scene in the UK, it's not really in a good position at all. What you've got to remember is that a lot of the centres in the UK aren't very big. It seems like the average is around 20 lanes. There are quite a few 24 and 26 lane centres, but there's also quite a large amount of smaller centres as well. Whereas if you look at the US, okay, it depends on the region you're in, how populated it is, etc. But I think it's safe to say that the centres are definitely a lot bigger. And from looking on various forums and on Reddit, the consensus seemed to be that in the US, the average amount of lanes in a centre is around 34 to 40. So when you've got small centres, clearly they're very reluctant to give lanes out to tournaments during peak times, because they want these lanes for their open players. But in small centres here in the UK, running a tournament means taking the majority of the lanes in a centre. As mentioned earlier in this video, if you're a tournament manager, you don't have a great deal of choice when choosing a centre, because many of them either don't really want tournaments, they aren't equipped to be able to hold high quality tournaments, and a lot of the very good centres who held fantastic tournaments previously have closed down as well. Another important issue I should mention is the lack of exposure bowling gets, and the fact that it basically isn't on TV in the UK at all. PBA events are never shown on any of the sports channels, and really the only TV time bowling got was when the Weber Cup was held. However, the last Weber Cup that was held was in 2021, and since then it has not returned. To make this worse, we don't really know why the Weber Cup has suddenly disappeared, as there was no announcement whatsoever from the organisers Matchroom Sport. I actually did a video about this last month, so if you want to find out the full story about the Weber Cup and its apparent cancellation, then just click on the link above. But in the end, if we have indeed lost the Weber Cup for good, then it's a huge blow, as it was literally the only event in the UK that had generated some TV exposure. And finally, the biggest problem that we probably have is the lack of upcoming youth bowlers. This is clearly a huge problem, as without young bowlers coming into the game, well, you're in a pretty bad position, to be brutally honest. It's hard to say exactly why youth bowling clubs are struggling to get the numbers, but once again, this isn't a problem that's just suddenly sprung up after the pandemic. This has been going on for at least the last 10 years. Many would argue that the current generation just aren't that interested in a sport like bowling, but I think ultimately what it comes down to is there is no real youth system set up in the country. It always falls to the individual youth clubs to try and attract the bowlers themselves to join. The problem is, the people who run the youth bowling clubs are volunteers, so they're not getting paid for this obviously, so they're doing the best they can. But really there needs to be a national plan in place where you have a proper system set up, youth coaching, etc. Essentially something that's devoted to both bringing new people into the game and at the same time providing them with the right sort of coaching to develop them at a young age. So that brings us to an end of today's video. Quite a long video, this one, because there was so many different points to try and cover, and hopefully this has covered exactly where bowling is right now and the main causes for its rapid decline. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Why do you think bowling has declined so much in recent years? And for those of you in the US or even other parts of the world, are you seeing the same sort of problems in your own country? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and once again, if you have enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you bowling fans, and see you all next time.